Welcome back inside the Gamecocks the show. I want to welcome in off the Meredith Taylor guest line. By the way, hour number one sponsored by Cindy Sear Falls Realtor. Hour number two sponsored by the Burgesson team at Remax at the Lake. We appreciate their sponsorships. My man Trey Biddy from Hawgs Sports. Trey, it's really good to see you, man. We talked in with the commercials about Nana's porch being unrivaled. Trey's unrivaled when it comes to Razorback athletics out there. Just get right to it, man. Lots of excitement that you hear externally about this Razorback football season. It's kind of been building the last 2 years under Sam Pittman. Just kind of talk about the ascension of the program and what the expectation is around Fayetteville and around Arkansas. South Carolina's far away from out there, so we maybe don't hear as much about what's going on out there in the state. What's kind of the feel?
Yeah, it's not too long ago we'd have talked all the time, wouldn't it? I mean,
yeah,
these two programs obviously started playing together in 1992 when both joined the SEC, and they just changed that up. But it's good to see South Carolina again in Fayetteville. It's been a while, and I think this is going to be an interesting matchup. Two programs that are trying to rebuild through, I guess, a culture change type of head coach, a fit. And, I'm not so sure that South Carolina didn't look a little bit at what Arkansas had done with Sam Pittman hire when they went after Shane Beamer. Arkansas in the same mold, maybe following some other coaches that kind of did the same thing. I've always said with Arkansas, when Chad Morris was the head coach, that the talent on the team was not a reflection of the record. I think the buy-in wasn't there, the culture. Chad Morris was just a terrible fit at Arkansas and a really bad head coach, to be frank. I mean, we can talk about winning SEC games, right? That's hard to do, but there's no reason you should be getting stomped in your backyard against Western Kentucky or North Texas or losing to Colorado State or San Jose State. Some of these programs, it's just ridiculous. And so, yes, he had a rebuild on his hands, but not quite as big a rebuild, I think, as a lot of the people outside thought. What Pittman did that I like was the first press conference, he came in and told the guys, hey, you didn't choose me, not first press conference, first meeting with the team. You didn't choose me, but I chose you. I don't want anybody to transfer, which was in stark contrast to what Chad Morris did, which I thought he lost the team the very first meeting he had with them. So Pittman, that first year, breathed some life back in the program. They went on the road to Starkville, beat Mississippi State, lost to Auburn the following game on that. I don't know if you Gamecock fans are familiar with the way that game ended.
I saw it. Yeah, not a good. Yeah, I was pulling for the Hogs that whole year because they played Georgia tough first half, in 2020 and all that good stuff.
Yeah, there were 3 games that year that, were decided by kicks at the end that Arkansas lost. They could have won 6 games that year, had a chance to maybe win another one with a bowl game that got canceled. But the last year, I think, surprised a lot of people. I think a lot of people expected Arkansas to take a step up, get into that bowl eligibility range. But 9 wins, I think, surprised a lot of people. And a lot of that was KJ Jefferson and filling some holes in the transfer portal. When I look at this team this year, and you guys may be looking at South Carolina too. I don't know if practices are open there, if you guys have been able to watch any of them. Arkansas opens like 20 to 30 minutes of practice every day. It's a good-looking team. But where I pull back, so I can kind of compare this Arkansas team to past Arkansas teams. And the depth, man per man, all that stuff, to me, looks like the best team in a decade. It really does. But a lot of that is the transfer portal. And I'm wondering if you guys, South Carolina, South Carolina brought in 9 transfers. Are you guys looking at the team going, man, this team's deep? They filled a lot of holes. There's not a lot of question marks and stuff. And, I look at Ole Miss. Ole Miss brought in 17 transfers. 39% of their roster is new.
Yeah.
Which is astounding. But, 17 transfers, an eighth of that a couple of years ago would have been a pretty hefty haul, in the transfer portal. So I just wonder about other SEC teams. Is every team just elevated because of the transfer portal? Because looking at Arkansas compared to past Arkansas teams, I think they look great right now. So I'm just wondering if everybody else feels the same way.
South Carolina has benefited by it, positions of need. It just seemed like, the holes that were on the roster last year, they patched those. And then the COVID year too, where everybody got a red shirt. South Carolina's got a lot of really older players. I mean, their two starting linebackers could be like a combined 47 years old. I mean, this year, they're guys that are starting this year that were in Will Muschamp's first full recruiting class. So
that's wild.
It's just crazy, crazy time we're living in. But I've heard that about the Razorbacks reports coming out of Fayetteville, just through other media that they look great. KJ Jefferson, our guy Michael Bratton from that SEC podcast, said he's putting him on the Heisman watch list.
I saw that.
Tell us about KJ. And boy, strong year last year, but I heard he's gotten even better.
I think he has. And I think a big question for him was the receiving core, not to get off track, but losing Traylon Burke was a huge story of the offseason, drafted number 16 overall to the Tennessee Titans. That's a big loss. But I think when you look at this team, man, 2 through 12 at wide receiver, it's a much better group than what they had last year. And really, I feel like from the spring to now, everybody's kind of elevated their game. They brought in Jaden Hazelwood, who was the former number 4 ranked player in the entire country coming out of high school. Warren Thompson was just outside the top 100 coming out of Florida State and transferred to Arkansas last year. He's made a lot of improvement. They've also got Ketron Jackson, who was their number 1 recruit in the class of 2021. And Matt Landers is a former Georgia player. You guys may be familiar with him, who went to Toledo last year and caught like 20 passes in 7 games for like 500 yards and 7 touchdowns. He's been really impressive. The thing that we hear out of Georgia, though, is like, great practice player, but he wasn't really showing up in games. So can he take the driving range to the course, I guess, so to speak, this year? But he's been we knew he was big, but he's been really fast too. So KJ has some weapons. Plus Trey Knox, who was a really big-time recruit, who's a converted wide receiver to tight end, was about 215 last year, all the way up to 245 now that he's transitioned over there. He could be a guy that could help them a lot. And they've got some running backs, Dominic Johnson, who I think is 1A, 1B with Rocket Sanders at running back. He's missed the last 29 practices going back to spring football and all of fall camp. Saw him for the first time yesterday in a green no-contact jersey. And I have to say, looked a lot better than I had anticipated him to look. Big back, 6'1", 247 pounds. That is a really tough tackle. So he's got a lot of pieces around him. 4 starters return on the offensive line, not just starters, but multi-year starters. 2 of the guys are going into their 3rd year. 2 of the other guys are going into their 4th year as starters. So he's got a lot of experience returning in front of him. And I really think he's taking his game up a notch. Arkansas didn't know what they had really in KJ Jefferson last year. They knew he was mobile and could run, but I don't think anybody was predicting 664 rushing yards or whatever it was, leading the team in rushing. And that's maybe an area where he can pull back a little bit instead of running over the safety to show him this is all day. Maybe he steps out of bounds, this year, because they're a little bit thin behind him at quarterback. Malik Hornsby has also worked some at wide receiver just to get his speed on the field. But I think to answer your question, where KJ has improved the most is, going to his 2nd, 3rd reads, those types of things versus, seeing Traylon Burks and just giving it, lobbing it up to him, getting it to him. But maybe utilizing more of his receivers. And his overall leadership, I think, has improved. He's always been a guy that, people describe him as the funniest guy on the team. I always think that's a great characteristic to have in a quarterback versus like robo QB. I don't like quarterbacks that are just stoic and, what's coming out of their mouth before they say it. KJ's, he's a character, and I think that's a positive thing to have in the locker room. But I would say that's probably the area that he's maybe improved the most, just kind of taking the ownership of the team. Last year, I felt like maybe this was Grant Morgan's team, the linebacker, the 6-year senior. This year, I think it's KJ's team.
Go ahead, Jason.
Oh, sorry. Trey Biddy, hogsports.com. I'll just mention this. You kind of answered our Malik Hornsby question. I'm watching the Outback Bowl last year, Trey. And I'm watching the Hawgs go up and down. I'm pulling for them, because I got friends that are Arkansas fans, yourself included. And it's been a rough few years in Fayetteville until Pittman got there. And so I pull, and I saw, so Hornsby comes in the game. I think KJ got hurt or something.
Yeah, he did. Hornsby
comes in and goes around just left side, just kind of a quarterback keeper around the left side. Boy, he was gone.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I have seen very few quarterbacks just take off like that. So he scares me. He's one that look at you. He should scare people.
He's got Lamar Jackson speed.
Yes.
I would be surprised if there's a faster quarterback in the country than Malik Hornsby. He didn't throw a pass in that game, JC. He just came in and secured the lead. Basically, just kept Penn State off the field the rest of the game. Arkansas won 24-10. I think that he is a guy that's too fast to keep off the field. Now, we thought he was going to play a little bit more wide receiver coming out of the spring. And I mean, this wasn't a gimmick. Like, he was beating, SEC defensive backs deep time and again. Like, they were all aware of where he was on the field. But with the emergence of so many wide receivers since the spring, I think they've kind of pulled back on that, let him continue to develop as a quarterback. I think he's developed a lot. Arm strength was never a problem with Malik. It was always just, it's a 5-yard pass and he throws it as hard as he can, just, the touch and just, the awareness of throwing catchable balls on some of those things. So I think he's improved as a quarterback. We're going to still see him in packages, sneaking him out on the field at wide receiver, jet sweeps, shifting him, to quarterback from wide receiver, double passes, those kinds of things I think we'll see. Now, they haven't done any of that in front of us during the open viewing period. In fact, I haven't seen him line up at wide receiver at all. But we saw a little bit of that in the spring. So they've got to get him on the field. He's one of the fastest players in the SEC and probably the fastest player on Arkansas's team. So they got to get that on the field.
Yeah, definitely. Coming in, we got a lot of hype coming out of Fayetteville and, well-deserved, I think, from what we saw on the product on the field last year. But where do you see any concerns coming in, Trey? What are we a little worried about out there?
Yeah, well, heading into camp, wide receiver is still a little bit of a question, even though I felt like 2 through 12, they were better than they were last year at that position. Quarterback, if something were to happen to KJ, Malik is a guy that you want to put in a game that's going to secure a lead. I don't know if at this point, if you feel comfortable with him coming in and, taking over a lead. You know what I mean? So that could be a question. Defensive line, they've certainly added a lot of transfers on defensive line, losing Torian Carter and I think the 12th practice of spring, almost wrapping up spring. Or I assume it's a knee injury. They haven't said specifically what it was, but it's looking like October or November. So, do the math. It's probably an ACL. But losing him on the inside, he was the top backup there at defensive tackle for a position group that's overall thin. Now, they did get Terry Hampton from Arkansas State, probably the strongest defensive player on the team. He's going to come in and help right away. The defense. So that's a big thing. So they brought in Terry Hampton. He's a transfer. The two backup defensive ends, Jordan Dominic came from Georgia Tech and Landon Jackson came from LSU. Jackson's 6'7", 275, good looking kid. Both those guys, all three of those guys are backups to provide a little bit of depth. But I guess maybe the unknown with those guys is a little bit of a concern. But like I said, with the transfer portal, we look at this team without the transfer portal, and that's Warren Thompson, who came in 2 years ago. But Warren Thompson at wide receiver, Jaden Hazelwood at wide receiver, Matt Landers at wide receiver. What's the wide receiver group look like without those guys? What's the defensive line look like without Jordan Dominic, Landon Jackson, Terry Hampton, out of the transfer portal? All guys that are going to provide a lot of quality depth. Drew Sanders. Drew Sanders was the number 12 ranked player in the country, started at Alabama last year, got injured, lost his job. And then transferred to Arkansas, but he's going to start at linebacker for them. Dwight McGlothern out of LSU, who started 6 games for them at cornerback. Latavius Brini, who started 12 games for Georgia last year, won the national championship. What does Arkansas look like without those guys? To me, there's some holes, but due to the transfer portal, they knew what they needed to go out and address. And I think that they hit a home run in the transfer portal. It's a top 10 class. South Carolina, you guys probably saying the same thing about the South Carolina class, a top 10 transfer class. So you're just able to fill a lot of holes these days. So instead of saying, well, if they can get some of these freshmen to come on at wide receiver or maybe freshmen linemen they didn't think they were going to have to use. Now it's, I guess the unknown of the defensive line with some of the key transfers and backup roles. That would probably be the biggest question.
Am I wrong? Is Landon Jackson, is he an Arkansas kid or a Louisiana kid?
He is a Texas kid. He's got a lot of ties to Northwest Arkansas. In fact, he probably would have committed to Arkansas coming out of high school.
Right.
But the time he committed, Arkansas was back-to-back 2 wins. So scared him off a little bit.
I got you. Yeah. Warren Thompson, of course, Gamecock fans know him. He committed to FSU over South Carolina, and Arkansas beat the Gamecocks and on Rocket Sanders. I remember that.
Yeah, Rocket Sanders, good looking kid. He looks like a superhero.
Out of Rockledge, Florida, right?
Yeah.
So there you go. There's why you recruit Florida. All right, Trey. One more thing before we let you go.